Welcome to This Week in Coworking, where industry leaders get succinct, actionable insights.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the This Week in Coworking podcast feed. I am Hector Kolonas, and I'm joined by the awesome, inspiring, community-focused, and totally tech-geeky Brandon Houston. Brandon, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic, Hector. How are you?
I'm not doing too bad. So, Brandon, you and I caught up very briefly as I popped into Coworking Canada. You gave a fantastic talk about what you're up to at Collingwood Foundry, a bit of your history about the impact you're making. We're going to dig into all of that. But for folks who haven't met you or haven't heard you speak before, Collingwood Foundry is not your first co-working space, right? So tell us a little bit more about your co-working journey. How did you get into this amazing community of community builders we call home?
Well, this really started back in 2011. I was back in my hometown of Chatham, and a couple of other friends that each ran their own businesses. I ran a web development agency at the time. Decided we wanted to combine and share office space. That was really where it came out of. Through that process, we actually looked at a few different models, and we were inspired by the work that Tanya Sermon did with the Center for Social Innovation in Toronto. We toured the space, we read the books that were published. That really inspired us to focus on forming it as a community space and open the doors and welcome other businesses into the space. Mm-hmm. We ran that for a few years. I left the organization to move to Collingwood in 2015. And then a couple of years after that, started the Foundry around 2017.
I mean, yeah, I keep hearing, that CSI and those books and all of that keep coming up. It definitely was great to hear Tanya speaking at the conference as well in Canada. Always an inspiration, always so honest. But bringing it back to you, why Collingwood? Is there family connection there? Was it just like pick a place on a map? What took you to Collingwood?
It was actually a woman that brought me to Collingwood. In 2015, I had just been in the process of selling my web development company, and I was looking for somewhere new. I had met a woman in Collingwood, very quickly made the move, fell in love with the community as soon as I landed here. That's what's kept me here. That woman has now moved on, but I fell in love with this community, and I actually can't see myself being anywhere else.
That's amazing. And yes, that is a story as true as time, but I'm so happy that it created so impactful for you and the community. But before we dig into exactly what Collingwood Foundry is and does, the population of Collingwood is 26-ish thousand, I think?
Yeah, about 26,000. It grew a fair bit after the pandemic, but I would say it's probably around 27,000 currently.
Great. And for our international listeners, it's in Ontario, right? In Canada.
That's correct.
Great. And what is the makeup of the town from when you moved there to now? Is it mostly remote workers? Is it factory workers? What is the population makeup of the town?
It shifted a lot in the last 10 years. Collingwood used to be a very blue-collar community. Our big industry was the shipbuilding industry. We're right on Georgian Bay. So for well over 100 years, we were the community that built large ships, large vessels. And that shifted a couple of decades ago, as with a lot of manufacturing and industrial. And it became more tourism focused. So right next to us is the town of Blue Mountains. It is known as one of Ontario's ski areas. So anybody who's a skier or a snowboarder comes up here to either visit Blue Mountain, or there's a lot of residents that have weekend homes or have moved up here entirely for some of the private ski clubs that are up here as well. I think we have about 7 or 8 private ski clubs also. So very heavily on the tourism and service-based sides. We have a lot of restaurants and businesses that accommodate that. But then over the last few years, as the pandemic hit, we saw a flow of people moving from the GTA. We're about 2 hours from Toronto, so the greater Toronto area. A lot of people chose this as a place to move to during the pandemic because it gave them an opportunity to choose lifestyle more than being in downtown Toronto and maybe not living the lifestyle where they were really flourishing. So that's where this became a big draw for people to move to the area.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to hear from someone who was there before the pandemic groups arrived. And it's interesting to see that shift. We're seeing it a lot across cities and towns everywhere. But in your talk at Coworking Canada, you dug into some really important topics. For folks who couldn't be there, what was your panel? What was your keynote about? And what were the key takeaways that people should think about when operating a co-working space in a community like yours?
Yeah, I would say the key takeaway, or the fact that I was trying to convey that was the most important was really this idea that these small town co-working spaces have an opportunity to develop strong community. It's that connection. It's the reason why people come to the spaces. So I had framed it up in that talk about co-working spaces being the town square for work and connection. And that's really what the Foundry has become.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I wanted to convey, that it's much less an exercise in real estate, selling desks and offices, and much more about developing authentic connections between people.
I mean, it was a fantastic talk, but you also gave some great examples in there of some connections that were made within your space that people don't really think about as a work connection. Can you elaborate a little bit on some of those?
Yeah, so we've had a number of people. The makeup of the Foundry is a mix of small business owners, solopreneurs, consultants, and remote workers. The remote worker piece is the one that grew significantly over the last 5 years, I would say. But the connections that we've seen are, we've had somebody that runs a digital agency hiring somebody else that's a member in the space as a writer to work on copy for them. We've seen 2 members partner together on a new business initiative and launch that. And we've also seen the connection between our space and the local economic development and small business support center really flourish around. We become sort of that people connection for anybody that's moving into the area or is visiting the area. And then in turn, we work with them to support on the business side. So if somebody's in our space and is looking for a specific need, we have that connection to then send to them.
Yeah, it's remarkable. So I always like to think about, you're not really, like, I don't know if there's any other co-working spaces in your town, but you're not really competing with them. You're competing with what if there was no co-working, right? Where would these connections have been made, or would they have been made if there was no Foundry? And I mean, do you think they would have met at their local coffee shop? Do you think there would have been maybe a networking event? Or like, do you think that these connections probably would never have been made if there wasn't that town square?
I think it's possible that they would have been made. I think what the Foundry does and a co-working space like this does is it reduces that friction or that potential, right? So in any entrepreneurial ecosystem, the frequency at which you can push people together, those collisions, increases the chance of connection and innovation and all the exciting stuff that happens with that. So the Foundry, I would say, is just one piece of that whole ecosystem, but it contributes and has probably accelerated some of those connections.
I mean, that is all what it's all about, right? Creating those moments of friendly collision that create opportunity. I think that is what we should define our whole, industry as. But you mentioned that your first co-working space was a nonprofit. Now, the Foundry is not a nonprofit, which means you now have to figure out, sustainability. How do you pay yourself? How do you pay for the expense? All of those things. And most of the operators I speak to, or most of the operators we hear about on stages, at conferences, in podcasts, etc., are running multinational brands. They have locations everywhere. They're in the big cities. They know the performers. What's different with a rural, for-profit co-working space that maybe a lot of us in the big cities overlook?
I mean, the main difference is obviously we don't have the density. So a town of 26,000, we have a much smaller market to promote to and to potentially draw in members. So that's one key factor. And the other side of it is our spaces are often much smaller. So the Foundry is 7,000 square feet. We started at 4,500 square feet. So we had 2 other iterations of growth, but it's a great example of what a lot of rural co-working spaces look like. Is they're often much smaller, which means that you really do have to define that model a little different. Again, still a mix of the full-time offices and the hot desks and floating memberships, but you really do need to pay attention to that a little closer. But there are other opportunities to drive revenue that aren't always as easy in a more urban, larger space.
I want to dig into that. Like, what are those revenue opportunities that make more sense for a rural community than an urban community?
So for us, one of the things that we've really leveraged, because we're a bit of a tourism community, we have teams that occasionally will come up to this region. So we offer full service meeting spaces. If a team is doing an offsite, we're a really good draw for, say, a team of 10 to come in. We can handle the facilitation if they need a facilitator. We'll do the catering for them. We'll organize all that because they're coming out of town. They don't know where to go for food. We're basically a white glove service for that meeting space. And, that can happen in urban centers as well. I do think we've seen this growth of these offsites and remote pop-ups for organizations that are doing these team buildings and workshops and strategic planning sessions. So, I mean, that's one example. The other is we've really closely partnered, as I said, with the local small business center and some of the other local business support organizations. So we co-host events in the community. Sometimes they're in the Foundry, sometimes they're outside of the Foundry. And what that does is it gives us a bit of a bigger presence in the community and helps drive some of that awareness of the business and potentially brings in new members.
So tell me a little bit about that 7,000 square feet. How is it split between kind of private offices versus kind of maybe drop-in space or meeting room space? What is your makeup across that 7,000 square feet?
About a quarter of it is private office. So we have four offices. One is a large team office, and then the rest is open space. We have a fairly good sized kitchen, 2 boardrooms, and then a couple of call pods and a small meeting pod on the main floor. And the main floor, which takes up close to another quarter, also doubles as event space. So it can be rented out to the community. It doesn't have to be just for members. So we rent it out for pop-ups. We've had retail businesses do pop-ups in the space on the weekend. We've had dinners, birthday parties, things like that.
I mean, I just said becoming the town square, right? You need to have both business and community events, which makes total sense. So my question then is, given the fact your spaces are smaller, you have all these additional revenue sources, take some work. White glove services, it takes work. Putting on events, it takes work. That means you're either working a lot yourself or you have to hire people, which means you probably don't want them sitting behind a desk all day, right? So that brings up the whole question of how do you automate as much of your business as possible so that you can focus on doing those things that generate revenue per minute, right? So tell me a little bit more about your strategy around automation and technology.
Yeah, so I'll touch on there's 2 elements there. One is the technology side and one is the personal side. Like us, a lot of smaller spaces can't afford to hire a full-time community manager. So what we've done is I've automated a significant amount of the operations of the space wherever possible, with the caveat to that it's really important to still create those personal connections and have that personal connection to your members. So I wouldn't say go overboard and automate absolutely everything, because one of the reasons they're here is for that connection. But the other thing that we've done is we have a member ambassador program. So one day a week, one of our members works the front desk and helps with some of the operations, offering tours, just checking on stock, things like that. They just help out in the space. And in turn, they get a free membership base.
Okay.
So that not only gives us a bit of a work pool, a staffing to help so that I can step away and work on the more strategic vision stuff, but it also helps them to connect with the members that are coming through the space as well.
I mean, that's such a good approach. We're going to dig into another topic. So automation and humans come together. We see it all the time across my day job over at Syncaroo is everyone's like, automate everything and remove humans, or make everything human and don't automate anything. You're kind of wiggling in that middle ground. What is your maybe top 3 favorite automations that don't detract from the human experience?
Yeah, the tools that we use actively, like if I go through our whole stack of stuff, the key ones, we use Nexodus as a platform to manage the space, and that handles the invoicing, the boardroom bookings, our community message board, all of that. So that is probably the key tool that we use to manage the space and automate as much as possible. We use MailChimp for our newsletter. I write a piece of that, so that still keeps that connection. Google Suite, obviously. And then we have a unified network system in here that automates the network connection piece. So when a member shows up, they log into the Wi-Fi, it automatically checks them in. There doesn't have to be somebody at the front desk checking them in. So that piece is all automated. We use WhatsApp as a bit of a member community discussion board. It's quite active, and we find that still helps to keep that connection around members. And then I've, diving into my geek tech background, have developed just a number of tools on my own, spun up small applications to help run the community and keep the community connected. The one thing that ties a lot of that together is Zapier. We use, I think I have about 30 Zaps that connect all our little tools together and help automate those things. So because I don't have to spend my time in all of that, it allows me to actually sit in community and directly interact with the members so that I don't have to just be in the operations side. So the one thing that I generally do is I gave up my desk a few years ago. I don't have an office. I float around the space, and we have a set of couches in the center of the space that everybody has to pass by. And I'm usually found at some point in the day sitting there, and undoubtedly a member will just come up and start a conversation. And to me, that's probably one of the most important things. It sounds silly and small, but that's one of the most important things that I do in this space.
It is the glue that sticks these communities together, right? Having someone you can speak to. We recently had on Tim Slaughter, and he shared that the reason why they've been successful is their focus on small businesses, who they would be able to see the CEOs, they'd be able to shake their hands, they'd be able to communicate with the teams on the ground, but also negotiate face to face. And so having that direct handshake relationship with your members is a critical part of building successful community-first co-working spaces. And I think you'd agree that Collingwood Foundry falls into that group of community-first kind of co-working spaces. My question then is, given that you have this influx of new people moving into the area, but also the seasonality of people coming up for white glove meetings or coming up for the snow season, how are you balancing your members, your full-time members, and this kind of on-demand or drop-in type member? Are you seeing any sort of clash between those two user groups? And if so, how are you dealing with that?
I would say we haven't seen any clash between those two user groups. I like the fresh faces or the sort of transient drop-in, day pass, weekender, that sort of thing, because it keeps a good energy in the space. A new face is showing up. People in Collingwood are incredibly friendly. Somebody will show up for a day and instantly be in a discussion with somebody in the kitchen or be invited out for lunch, undoubtedly. So we have not seen that kind of a clash. We definitely do have, there's the core membership that is very involved on the social and the connection side. We have the membership that is here to work, and that's their focus, and they get their work done and they go home. And then there's everything kind of in between, people that float in and float out, and it's open to everybody. And really the way, because our space is broken up, 2 floors, the main floor that acts as the event space is also floating desk space during the day. So a lot of the day pass users end up down here. We do get them migrating upstairs as well. But overall, I can't say that we've ever seen any sort of a clashing between those two.
From what I'm hearing you say, your core member group is so hospitable that if there was a dispute about overusing a meeting room or hogging one of the phone booths, it kind of feels like they'll kill them with kindness and be like, hey, that's cool that you're here. Let's go grab lunch. And by the way, we only use them for about an hour each, right? Just so that everyone can get access. And that's probably why you don't have those clashes. I want to go sit in the meeting room all day. And it's a little bit of a culture clash, but it sounds like your community overflows that. And it's just like, we're glad you're here. This is how we roll. This is how we run things, which is just fascinating and amazing to see. It means that you've built the right culture in your space.
I would think the one thing I would add to that is it really does, one important element of it is the introduction of the space for anybody that is coming in. So yes, everybody is very welcoming and understanding and hospitable, but there is a key element of when somebody arrives for a day pass or for the weekend, they always get a full tour. We always make sure that they have time for that. And we go over quickly the values and the expectations of the space. The expectations are the call pods are first come, first serve, but they're not meant to be offices. If you need to jump in, jump in. If you need something more longer term, talk to me about booking something else out as an option. Mm-hmm. So it is setting those expectations at the start as well.
I mean, that is exactly where I was going to take it to. And I'm assuming that you have maybe not training for those community managers who are you're part of your community facing team, but some sort of just guiding playbook or rules. What does that look like?
We do. So we use Asana as a project management tool, but I also use it as a task management tool. And I have some pretty thorough SOPs documenting what the process is. So checklists for every day. Here's the things that need to be done. Check off when they're done. Like I'm pretty thorough with that piece to make sure that we do stay operationally efficient and that the space is kept up in the way that it needs. So I've developed a full guide for co-working ambassadors in our space, and they review it. We have regular meetings just to go over any concerns or questions. And I always make myself available if there are any of those to come up. So I've tried to put as much of a process in place to kind of prevent any challenges there.
I love that, but be careful, Brendan. Your web developer is shining through. You're outing yourself as a web developer here with those SOPs. So that's actually fascinating. But I want to ask you one last question, Brendan, and that is, if other folks find themselves in a town or a city or a village around 26,000 people, and they want to start a co-working space, what was your, pro tips or best advice about how to approach that?
One of the first things I did was actually connecting with the Small Business Center. And that helped me get an idea of what the community was like, whether there was opportunity there. Because there does need to be demand. If there's not, it's a big uphill educational battle to teach people what co-working is. So that's where I would start. Most towns have a small business center or some connection to the local economic development, and they can really help guide you. And the other thing is really just put it out there. You can pre-market, pre-sell, or just send out surveys to people, drop into your local coffee shops, take a look and see how many people are sitting at the tables with laptops for 3 hours and stir up some conversations with them. So one of the things that we did with our local coffee shop, because it gets very busy, people will inevitably come in, buy one coffee and sit on their laptop for 3 or 4 hours. So we developed a marketing plan with them where we put little table toppers on that said, looking for somewhere to get some work done, bring a coffee cup from this cafe in and get $5 off of a day pass. So we've run that on and off, and that's really helpful. But that will give you insight into the demographic and if there's potentially a market there for it. When getting it off the ground, the key, I would say, is there has to be a community builder or a community ambassador, somebody that lives locally that is a connector. That's a key person to have in your space. If it's not you, find somebody and give them a free membership. The other thing is if you can pull in at least 2 small businesses to start with, that kicks off that community building, that micro ecosystem in the space. Because the biggest challenge is starting a space without members. It's hard to find members when your space is empty. So if you can make those connections with 2, maybe 3 business owners, solopreneurs that want to work together in the space, that will sort of spark that community.
I mean, I love the coffee example. Like, I'm always an advocate for go and find those coffee shops that do not want the laptop warriors and figure out how to partner with them. I love the idea of bringing the cup in. It's just a very low-tech way of proving you've bought something and then giving that discount back. Fantastic piece of advice. One last question then for you on that, working with the local business center. A lot of folks are terrified of people stealing their idea, right? I found this great idea. I've discovered co-working through some newsletter or somewhere on the internet. I want to bring this. What do you tell to people who are like, I don't want to tell the local council because they'll just do it themselves. So I don't want to work with the local small business center because they'll just open a co-working space. How would you tell people to address those concerns?
The number of times that I've seen that happen is very few, because the reality is that a lot of small business centers and economic development departments in smaller towns don't have a lot of resources or a lot of capacity to be able to open and operate a co-working space. And I think their job is to help support the local economy. It's not to start businesses on their own. So I don't think you'll see that often. Occasionally, I have seen local towns that want to start their own co-working space. Well, then maybe there's an opportunity to partner with them in that case because of that lack of capacity. I'd say to anybody, don't be afraid of those conversations, because the upside to having those conversations is potentially having a resource that can drive members to you. When a new resident moves to Collingwood, they may be an entrepreneur or they may be a remote worker. They might pop into the small business center. We've seen this dozens throughout the year. They'll pop in there and ask about local community connections. Who should we connect with? I have this business, or I have this business idea. They always refer them over to the Foundry. So they become a lead generator for us, just because they know that we have the community there. The idea of them driving that themselves oftentimes won't happen, doesn't work, or fails because they just don't have those resources to be able to build a space themselves.
Fantastic advice. Brendan, as always, thank you for, standing up, sharing so openly and geeking out with me today. I'm absolutely going to pull you back into another podcast episode because I'm already seeing a pattern with a whole bunch of other folks who are running spaces in areas where people go only for skiing. So there is something there, skiing and co-working. Haven't put it all together, but I'm definitely going to rope you back in for that. Thanks again for joining us. If people want to reach out to you, Brendan, where should they find you?
Easiest way, you can email me, brandon@collingwoodfoundry.com. I'm on Instagram @BrandonH. I'm looking forward to connecting with any other rural co-working space owners. I love knowledge sharing. I meet regularly with a handful of other space owners. So really looking forward to connecting and knowledge sharing as much as possible.
Thanks again, Brandon.
Thank you so much.